Welcome to Brain Upgrade. When most people think about aging, they imagine decline. They picture slower thinking, weaker memory, and reduced mental performance. That assumption has been reinforced for decades, but modern neuroscience paints a far more nuanced picture. The brain does not simply deteriorate with age, it reorganizes. Certain abilities naturally become less efficient, while others become remarkably stronger. Understanding this distinction is one of the most important steps toward understanding why some individuals seem to become wiser, calmer, and more influential after the age of 50. One of the first changes that researchers observe is a gradual reduction in processing speed. This means the brain may require slightly more time to recognize patterns, retrieve information, or switch rapidly between different tasks. Many people mistake this slower speed for lower intelligence, but these are not the same thing. Processing speed is only one component of cognition. Intelligence also depends on judgment, pattern recognition, emotional regulation, and the ability to connect experiences across many years. In these areas, maturity often provides an enormous advantage. Think about the difference between reading every page of a map and knowing the landscape because you've walked through it hundreds of times. The younger brain may search faster, but the experienced brain often knows exactly where to look. That efficiency doesn't come from speed. It comes from decades of building stronger neural associations through repeated exposure to real-world situations. Every significant experience leaves traces in the nervous system. Whenever you solve a difficult problem, recover from failure, navigate uncertainty, or adapt to unexpected change, groups of neurons strengthen their communication. This process, known as neuroplasticity, continues throughout life. While the rate of forming entirely new connections may gradually slow with age, the quality and stability of existing networks often improve. Instead of relying on isolated pieces of information, the mature brain begins integrating knowledge across multiple domains simultaneously. This explains why many older adults excel at solving complex problems that have no obvious answer. Rather than reacting impulsively, they unconsciously compare the present situation with hundreds or even thousands of previous experiences stored across distributed neural networks. Their brain is performing an advanced pattern matching process that younger individuals simply haven't had enough time to build. Researchers often distinguish between two forms of intelligence. One involves rapid reasoning, novel problem solving, and quick calculations. This ability tends to reach its highest level earlier in adulthood. The second involves accumulated knowledge, vocabulary, judgment, and practical understanding developed through years of learning and experience. This form of intelligence continues growing for decades because every meaningful experience adds another layer to an already sophisticated mental model of the world. That accumulated understanding changes the way decisions are made. Instead of focusing only on immediate outcomes, the mature brain naturally begins evaluating second-order and third-order consequences. In other words, it asks not only what happens today, but also what will this decision create 6 months from now, 5 years from now. This broader perspective is supported by stronger communication between brain regions involved in memory, planning, emotional evaluation, and executive control. Another fascinating shift occurs in attention. Younger brains are often highly sensitive to novelty. New information, unexpected rewards, and rapidly changing environments trigger strong activation within the dopamine system. While this drive for exploration is valuable early in life, it can also produce distraction, impulsive behavior, and constant pursuit of short-term stimulation. With maturity, many individuals become less controlled by novelty and more guided by significance. Their attention gradually shifts toward information that aligns with long-term values and meaningful goals. Instead of asking what's exciting, the brain increasingly asks what's important. This transition reflects not weakness but efficiency. The nervous system begins conserving energy by filtering out unnecessary noise and allocating more cognitive resources to what truly matters. This filtering ability is one reason highly mature personalities often appear calm during situations that overwhelm others. They are not ignoring complexity. They have simply learned which variables deserve attention and which do not. Their brain has become better at distinguishing signal from distraction. Experience also reshapes confidence. Early confidence often depends on certainty. People feel secure when they believe they have all the answers. But repeated exposure to life's unpredictability teaches a different lesson. The most effective decision makers become comfortable with uncertainty itself. They understand that flexibility often produces better outcomes than rigid certainty. This psychological flexibility reflects a brain that has repeatedly adapted to changing environments rather than resisting them. Perhaps the greatest transformation is that experience reduces the need to prove intelligence. Younger individuals often display what they know because competence is closely tied to identity. As experience accumulates, genuine expertise becomes quieter. The focus shifts from appearing knowledgeable to being effective. That subtle change influences communication, leadership, relationships, and decision-making in profound ways. This is why some of the most respected people in any field are not necessarily the fastest thinkers in the room. They are the individuals whose judgment consistently leads to better outcomes. Their nervous system has spent decades refining what deserves attention, strengthening useful neural pathways, eliminating ineffective habits, and integrating countless lessons into a coherent understanding of how the world works. The remarkable reality is that the brain is not designed only to grow during youth. It is designed to keep adapting across the lifespan. For those who continue learning, challenging themselves, staying physically active, sleeping well, managing stress, and remaining intellectually curious, age becomes more than the passing of time. It becomes a process of neurological refinement, where wisdom is not simply an abstract concept, but the measurable result of a brain that has learned, reorganized, and become increasingly efficient through decades of lived experience. One of the most remarkable changes that can occur as people move through life is not an increase in intelligence, strength, or knowledge alone. It is the gradual ability to regulate emotion without suppressing it. This distinction is critical because emotional regulation does not mean feeling less. It means developing greater control over how those emotions influence behavior. From a neuroscience perspective, this ability depends on stronger communication between brain regions responsible for detecting emotional significance and those responsible for planning, reasoning, and self-control. When you're young, your nervous system is highly responsive to novelty, uncertainty, and social evaluation. A disagreement can feel like a threat. Criticism can remain in your mind for days. An unexpected setback can trigger a cascade of stress hormones that narrow attention and increase impulsive behavior. This response isn't a flaw. It's part of how the brain learns. Every emotionally significant event teaches the nervous system what to prioritize in the future. But over decades, assuming a person continues learning rather than repeating the same reactions, the brain begins identifying patterns. It starts recognizing that many situations which once seemed urgent were actually temporary. This repeated exposure changes the way the nervous system interprets stress. Instead of immediately activating a high alert response, the brain becomes better at evaluating whether a situation truly requires intense emotional energy. A major player in this process is the interaction between the prefrontal cortex and deeper emotional circuits, particularly those involved in detecting potential threats. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for executive functions such as planning, impulse control, and decision-making. With repeated experience and intentional reflection, these networks become more efficient at regulating emotional responses before they translate into actions. This doesn't eliminate emotion. Rather, it creates a brief but incredibly valuable pause between feeling something and reacting to it. That pause is one of the defining characteristics of emotionally mature individuals. Imagine receiving harsh criticism at work. An immediate reaction might be defensiveness, anger, or the desire to prove yourself right. These responses are driven by automatic survival mechanisms that evolved to protect social standing within groups. However, an emotionally regulated brain often asks a different question before responding. What information in this criticism is actually useful? That shift from defending the ego to evaluating the facts represents a profound neurological advantage. This ability becomes stronger because experience teaches the brain that immediate emotional reactions often create long-term problems. Relationships suffer, opportunities disappear, decisions become biased. Over time, the nervous system learns that delaying a response by even a few moments allows higher-order brain networks to process more information before action is taken. Stress resilience follows a similar pattern. Stress itself is not inherently harmful. In fact, short periods of stress improve focus, learning, and performance by increasing the release of chemicals that prepare the brain and body for action. The problem arises when stress becomes chronic and the nervous system remains activated for extended periods without recovery. Individuals who develop exceptional emotional resilience usually aren't exposed to less stress. They've simply become better at recovering from it. Their nervous system transitions more efficiently between states of activation and relaxation. This flexibility is essential because a healthy brain is not one that avoids stress altogether, but one that knows when to activate and, equally important, when to deactivate. Recovery is where emotional maturity truly reveals itself. Younger individuals often replay conflicts repeatedly, keeping the body's stress response active long after the event has ended. Older, emotionally resilient individuals are more likely to recognize when continued mental rehearsal serves no productive purpose. They conserve mental energy by directing attention toward solutions instead of endlessly revisiting problems. Another important shift involves social relationships. Early adulthood is often characterized by a strong desire for acceptance and belonging. The brain is particularly sensitive to social approval because these signals activate reward pathways associated with dopamine. Being accepted feels rewarding because throughout human evolution, belonging increased the likelihood of survival. As people accumulate life experience, however, many discover that chasing universal approval is impossible. This realization changes motivational systems. Instead of maximizing the number of relationships, the brain begins prioritizing the quality of relationships. Emotional energy becomes invested in people who contribute to growth, trust, and mutual respect rather than those who create constant conflict or uncertainty. This change has measurable effects on well-being. Strong, meaningful relationships consistently predict better mental health, improved physical health, and greater resilience under stress. Importantly, these benefits arise not from having many social connections, but from having dependable, emotionally supportive ones. The mature personality naturally filters relationships based on depth rather than popularity. Empathy also evolves. Emotional maturity is not about becoming detached or indifferent. In many cases, empathy actually increases because accumulated experiences make it easier to understand another person's perspective. Someone who has experienced failure, disappointment, success, loss, and recovery possesses a richer emotional framework for interpreting the experiences of others. However, mature empathy differs from emotional absorption. It allows someone to understand another person's suffering without becoming overwhelmed by it. This balance is essential in leadership, parenting, mentoring, and long-term relationships because it enables support without sacrificing clear judgment. Perhaps one of the greatest signs of emotional development is the reduced need to win every argument. Younger minds often equate being correct with being valuable. More mature minds recognize that preserving trust, maintaining perspective, and protecting long-term relationships frequently matter more than proving a point. This is not surrender. It is strategic emotional regulation based on understanding the larger consequences of behavior. Over time, these repeated patterns reshape personality itself. Calmness is no longer something that must be forced. Patience becomes more natural. Confidence depends less on external validation and more on accumulated evidence gathered through years of overcoming adversity. The nervous system gradually shifts from reacting automatically to responding intentionally. This is why certain individuals seem remarkably steady regardless of external circumstances. They have trained their brain through experience, reflection, and repeated adaptation to separate temporary emotion from permanent identity. They still experience disappointment, frustration, fear, and uncertainty. The difference is that these emotions no longer control the direction of their lives. Instead, they become information signals that are acknowledged, interpreted, and used wisely before action is taken. That capacity to respond rather than react is one of the rarest forms of psychological strength, and for many people it continues to deepen well beyond the age of 50. One of the most profound psychological shifts that occurs with maturity is not an increase in confidence alone, it is a complete transformation in the source of that confidence. Early in life, much of our behavior is influenced by external feedback. We naturally pay close attention to approval, recognition, social status, and the opinions of others because the human brain evolved to survive within groups. Being accepted once meant greater safety and access to resources. As a result, the nervous system developed a powerful sensitivity to social evaluation. This tendency is especially strong during adolescence and early adulthood. The brain's reward circuitry responds robustly to praise, validation, and signals of belonging. Compliments can elevate mood almost instantly, while criticism or rejection can feel disproportionately painful. From a biological standpoint, this makes sense. The brain is constantly updating its internal model of social standing because, throughout human history, social connection was closely tied to survival. But something remarkable begins to happen as experience accumulates. Over years of success, failure, uncertainty, disappointment, and growth, the brain starts collecting evidence that external approval is often unpredictable. People may praise you one day and criticize you the next for making the very same decision. Circumstances change, expectations change, public opinion changes. Eventually, the nervous system begins recognizing a pattern. Relying on external validation creates instability because the source of confidence lies outside your control. This realization doesn't usually arrive in a single dramatic moment. It develops gradually through repeated experiences. Every setback teaches the brain that approval cannot protect you from failure. Every achievement demonstrates that success does not permanently eliminate self-doubt. Slowly, attention shifts inward. Instead of asking, "Do people believe in me?" the mind begins asking, "Have I earned my own trust?" That question changes everything. Self-trust is fundamentally different from self-esteem. Self-esteem often fluctuates depending on recent outcomes. Self-trust is built through repeated evidence that you can handle uncertainty, solve problems, recover from mistakes, and continue moving forward even when circumstances become difficult. Neuroscientifically, this shift reflects changes in how experiences are integrated across memory, emotional processing, and executive control systems. Rather than evaluating identity based on isolated events, the brain constructs a broader narrative from years of accumulated experience. Confidence becomes less dependent on individual victories and more dependent on an internal record of resilience. This explains why emotionally mature individuals often appear unusually calm when facing uncertainty. They are not assuming everything will go perfectly. Instead, they have developed confidence in their ability to adapt regardless of the outcome. Their nervous system has learned through repeated exposure that discomfort is temporary and manageable. Another important transformation involves motivation itself. During earlier stages of life, motivation is frequently driven by comparison. People compare careers, income, appearance, achievements, relationships, or social influence. Modern environments amplify this tendency by providing endless opportunities to measure ourselves against others. Every comparison activates reward and evaluation systems that influence emotional state and decision-making. The problem is that comparison creates a moving target. No matter how much someone achieves, there will always be another person who appears more successful in some dimension. The brain remains trapped in a cycle where satisfaction depends on variables it cannot fully control. With maturity, many individuals begin replacing comparison with purpose. Purpose activates motivation differently. Instead of pursuing activities primarily for external rewards, behavior becomes aligned with personally meaningful values. This shift produces greater consistency because internally driven goals remain stable even when external recognition disappears. Purpose also influences attention. The brain naturally allocates cognitive resources toward information relevant to long-term objectives while filtering distractions that previously consumed emotional energy. As a result, decisions become more intentional, less reactive, and better aligned with deeply held priorities. One noticeable consequence is authenticity. Authenticity is often misunderstood as simply expressing whatever you feel. In reality, authentic behavior emerges when actions consistently reflect personal values rather than social expectations. This requires significant neurological coordination because it involves integrating emotional awareness, long-term planning, memory, and self-regulation. Authentic individuals are not fearless. They simply become less willing to sacrifice their principles in exchange for temporary approval. This creates an interesting social paradox. When someone constantly seeks approval, others often perceive uncertainty. Their behavior changes depending on the audience, making them appear less predictable and less trustworthy. By contrast, individuals whose behavior remains consistent across different situations tend to inspire confidence because their actions become easier to understand and anticipate. Trust grows from consistency. Consistency grows from internal clarity. And internal clarity grows from repeatedly choosing values over convenience. Over time, this process reduces unnecessary mental conflict. Instead of constantly wondering how they should appear, emotionally mature individuals devote more cognitive resources to solving meaningful problems, building strong relationships, and improving their skills. Another characteristic of the rarest personalities is their relationship with uncertainty. Most people attempt to eliminate uncertainty before taking action. They wait until conditions feel perfect, until every answer is available, or until confidence magically appears. Unfortunately, the brain interprets prolonged avoidance as evidence that uncertainty itself is dangerous. This strengthens fear rather than reducing it. Highly mature individuals develop the opposite pattern. They repeatedly expose themselves to manageable uncertainty while maintaining deliberate action. Every successful adaptation teaches the nervous system that uncertainty is survivable. Over time, confidence becomes rooted not in certainty but in adaptability. This distinction is subtle but incredibly powerful. Certainty depends on controlling the future. Adaptability depends on strengthening yourself. Only one of those is realistically possible. As this mindset develops, the need to impress others gradually fades. Energy that was once invested in protecting an image becomes available for learning, creating, mentoring, and contributing. The personality becomes quieter but more influential. Words become fewer but more meaningful because they emerge from observation rather than impulse. People often describe these individuals as naturally confident, but what they're actually observing is emotional independence. Their identity no longer rises and falls with praise, criticism, success, or failure. Those experiences still matter, but they no longer define who they are. This is why some of the most respected individuals in any field rarely seem desperate for recognition. They have reached a point where purpose outweighs popularity, values outweigh validation, and internal stability outweigh external approval. Their nervous system has spent decades refining what truly deserves attention, allowing them to move through challenges with a level of composure that cannot be developed overnight. The rarest personality is not someone who has never struggled with insecurity. It is someone who has gradually trained the brain to replace the constant search for acceptance with something far more durable, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing their actions consistently reflect who they have chosen to become. For much of modern culture, there is an unspoken belief that our greatest years occur early in life. We're told that youth is the peak of creativity, energy, ambition, and opportunity. While it's true that certain physical capacities and aspects of rapid cognitive processing are strongest in early adulthood, the idea that human potential follows a steady downward slope after middle age is not supported by what we know about the brain. In many of the abilities that define exceptional leadership, sound judgment, emotional resilience, and long-term success, the nervous system can continue improving for decades. This is one reason why some of the rarest personalities don't fully emerge until after the age of 50. The key is understanding that excellence is rarely the product of a single trait. It is the integration of multiple systems working together. Knowledge alone is not enough. Emotional control alone is not enough. Discipline alone is not enough. But when experience, self-regulation, wisdom, and purpose begin reinforcing one another, the result is a level of psychological stability that younger versions of ourselves often cannot yet access. One of the greatest advantages accumulated over time is pattern recognition. Every conversation, challenge, mistake, success, and recovery leaves an imprint on the nervous system. The brain continuously updates its internal model of the world by comparing present situations with previous experiences. After decades of learning, those comparisons become incredibly sophisticated. Decisions that once required intense mental effort begin occurring almost automatically because the brain has encountered similar patterns before. This is not guesswork. It is the product of thousands of stored experiences interacting across distributed neural networks. Instead of analyzing every detail from scratch, the mature brain identifies familiar structures within complex situations. That efficiency allows more attention to be devoted to strategy rather than simply reacting to immediate events. This becomes especially valuable when facing uncertainty. Younger individuals often rely heavily on information. They seek more data, more opinions, and more reassurance before making decisions. Information is important, but experience teaches something equally valuable. Complete certainty rarely exists. At some point, effective decision-making depends less on acquiring additional facts and more on trusting a well-developed process of reasoning. That trust develops through repetition. Every time you make a difficult decision, evaluate the outcome, learn from mistakes, and refine your approach, the brain strengthens circuits involved in judgment. Over years, this creates an internal decision-making framework that becomes increasingly reliable even in unfamiliar situations. Another important characteristic of mature personalities is delayed gratification. The nervous system becomes better at valuing long-term outcomes over immediate rewards. This isn't because desires disappear. Rather, experience repeatedly demonstrates that meaningful achievements usually require sustained effort over extended periods. From a biological perspective, this represents a shift in motivational priorities. Instead of chasing short bursts of satisfaction, the brain begins finding reward in consistency itself. Progress becomes more motivating than instant results. Daily habits become more valuable than occasional breakthroughs. This mindset dramatically changes behavior. Someone operating from long-term thinking is less likely to abandon a project because progress appears slow. They're less likely to make emotionally driven financial decisions. They're less likely to sacrifice health for temporary convenience. Their behavior reflects an understanding that small actions repeated consistently produce exponential results over time. This principle extends into physical health as well. The brain and body exist as a single integrated system. Regular physical activity supports blood flow to the brain, improves metabolic health, enhances sleep quality, and stimulates the release of molecules involved in maintaining healthy neural function. Resistance training helps preserve muscle mass, which supports mobility and overall health. Aerobic exercise improves cardiovascular efficiency, ensuring that oxygen and nutrients continue reaching brain tissue effectively. Sleep remains equally essential. Throughout sleep, the brain consolidates memories, strengthens learning, clears metabolic waste, and restores the balance of numerous neurochemical systems. Individuals who maintain healthy sleep habits throughout adulthood give their nervous system the opportunity to continually repair and optimize itself. The cumulative effects become increasingly important with age. Learning also remains one of the strongest drivers of continued brain adaptation. Contrary to common belief, neuroplasticity does not disappear in adulthood. The brain retains the capacity to reorganize throughout life, provided it continues receiving meaningful challenges. Learning a new language, acquiring a musical skill, studying unfamiliar subjects, solving complex problems, or developing professional expertise all encourage the formation and strengthening of neural connections. The important point is that learning should remain slightly uncomfortable. When tasks become completely automatic, the brain expends less energy adapting. But when challenges stretch existing abilities without becoming overwhelming, the nervous system responds by refining its networks. This process contributes to maintaining cognitive flexibility across the lifespan. Another defining feature of the rarest personalities is selective attention. As people mature, they often become increasingly aware that attention is one of their most valuable resources. Time is limited, energy is limited, mental bandwidth is limited. Therefore, protecting attention becomes a strategic priority. Rather than reacting to every distraction, every argument, or every opportunity, emotionally mature individuals become highly selective about where they invest cognitive effort. They understand that every yes requires saying no to something else. This selectivity creates extraordinary focus. It also reduces chronic stress because the nervous system is no longer attempting to process every external demand equally. Instead, attention becomes aligned with deeply meaningful objectives, relationships, and responsibilities. Perhaps the greatest transformation after 50 is perspective. Time changes how the brain evaluates problems. Situations that once felt catastrophic are viewed within the context of decades rather than days. Failures become lessons rather than identities. Success becomes an opportunity for contribution rather than validation. Relationships become more important than reputation. Character becomes more important than appearance. This broader perspective creates remarkable psychological freedom. People no longer feel compelled to compete in every conversation, defend every opinion, or prove their worth through constant achievement. Their confidence comes from accumulated evidence gathered over a lifetime of adaptation. They understand that growth is not measured by how impressive someone appears in a single moment, but by how consistently they continue evolving. The rarest personality is not defined by age itself. Many people grow older without becoming wiser because experience alone does not guarantee development. What matters is the willingness to remain curious, to keep learning, to reflect honestly, to care for the brain and body, and to repeatedly choose long-term growth over short-term comfort. When those habits are practiced year after year, the nervous system continues refining itself. Knowledge becomes wisdom, confidence becomes quiet, discipline becomes automatic, emotional stability becomes a natural state rather than a constant struggle. That is why, for some individuals, life after 50 is not the closing chapter of personal development. It is the stage where decades of learning, resilience, and deliberate practice finally come together, allowing the rarest version of their personality to emerge with a level of clarity, purpose, and strength that only time can build. Thanks for watching Brain Upgrade. If you found this video valuable, subscribe, leave a comment with your biggest takeaway, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Until next time, keep upgrading your brain,